late 1700s, nearly half the population of Argentina was black. In Buenos Aires, the capital, between 30 and 40% of every person walking the streets was of African descent. Argentina was one of the most African nations in South America. Today, the government claims less than 1% of the population is black. Former President Carlos Menem stood in front of cameras and declared, and this is a direct quote, "In Argentina, blacks do not exist. That is a Brazilian problem." So what happened? Where did millions of black people go? They didn't leave. They didn't migrate. They didn't vanish into thin air. They were eliminated, deliberately, systematically, by a government that decided the future of Argentina would be white and was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. What I'm about to show you is not a chapter of history. It is a crime scene. And the evidence has been sitting in plain sight for over 150 years. I've started a WhatsApp channel where I share the history YouTube suppresses, the stories they don't want trending. The link is in the pinned comment. Join now, because this is one of the most disturbing stories I've ever told on this channel. To understand what Argentina did to its black population, you first have to understand how large that population was, because the scale of the erasure only hits when you grasp what existed before. When the Spanish colonized Argentina in the 16th century, they did what every colonial power did. They brought enslaved Africans to do the work. Starting in the late 1500s, enslaved people from West and Central Africa were shipped across the Atlantic and brought into the Rio de la Plata region, the area around what is now Buenos Aires. Over the next 3 centuries, roughly 200,000 enslaved Africans were brought to Argentina in chains. They worked as domestic servants, agricultural laborers, craftsmen, and soldiers. They built the infrastructure. They served in the homes of the elite. They fought in Argentina's wars. And over time, they didn't just survive. They built a culture. By the late 1700s, the numbers were staggering. In the province of Córdoba, black people made up 44% of the population. In Buenos Aires, the figure was between 30 and 40%. In some interior provinces, black residents outnumbered white ones. Argentina was, by any demographic measure, a deeply African nation. And this wasn't a silent population. Afro-Argentines created mutual aid societies. They published their own newspapers. They held public celebrations rooted in African traditions. They developed music and dance forms that would later become the foundation of Argentina's most famous cultural export, the tango. The tango didn't come from European ballrooms. Its earliest roots trace back to the rhythms and movements of the African diaspora, specifically traditions connected to the Kingdom of Congo. Argentina didn't just have a black population. It had a black culture, a black press, black institutions, a community that was visible, vibrant, and growing. And that's precisely what made certain people very uncomfortable. His name was Domingo Faustino Sarmiento. He served as president of Argentina from 1868 to 1874. And he is the architect of one of the most successful racial elimination campaigns in modern history. Sarmiento was an unapologetic white supremacist. He didn't hide it. He wrote about it openly in his own diaries and published works in official communications. He believed that European racial purity was the foundation of civilization and that the presence of black and indigenous people was an obstacle to Argentina's progress. In 1848, 20 years before he became president, Sarmiento wrote in his diary, "In the United States, 4 million are black, and within 20 years will be 8 million. What is to be done with such blacks hated by the white race? Slavery is a parasite that the vegetation of English colonization has left attached to the leafy tree of freedom." He saw black people as a parasite on the tree of freedom, and when he gained power, he set out to remove them. Sarmiento's methods were not dramatic public violence. They were quiet, bureaucratic, institutional, and devastatingly effective. First, he forced black communities into segregated neighborhoods, areas with no functioning infrastructure, no proper sanitation, no health care, and no access to the services available to white residents. He created the conditions for death, and then let disease do the work. When cholera and yellow fever epidemics swept through Buenos Aires, particularly the catastrophic yellow fever outbreak of 1871, the black neighborhoods were the hardest hit. Not because black people were more susceptible to disease, but because they had been deliberately concentrated in the areas most vulnerable to it. No clean water, no drainage, no doctors. The epidemic killed thousands, and the government watched it happen. Second, Sarmiento used war as a weapon of demographic destruction. When Argentina entered the War of the Triple Alliance against Paraguay in 1865, thousands of black men were conscripted and sent to the front lines. This wasn't voluntary service. Black men were forcibly recruited at rates far higher than any other group. They were placed in the most dangerous units. They were given the worst positions, and they died in staggering numbers. The government knew the war would produce massive casualties, and they knew exactly who was absorbing those casualties. It wasn't accidental attrition, it was strategic elimination, using a foreign war to reduce the domestic black population. Third, Sarmiento imprisoned Afro-Argentines for trivial or entirely fabricated offenses. The criminal justice system became a tool of racial control, a pattern that should sound familiar to anyone who understands mass incarceration in the United States. Except in Argentina, the scale was proportionally even more devastating because the black population was already being attacked from every other direction simultaneously. And fourth, the most coldly calculated strategy of all, Sarmiento opened the floodgates to European immigration. Between 1857 and 1940, over 6 million European immigrants arrived in Argentina. Italians, Spaniards, Germans, French, Eastern Europeans. They were recruited deliberately and specifically to dilute and replace the black population. The goal wasn't just immigration, it was demographic engineering, using sheer numbers to drown out the African presence until it was statistically invisible. This wasn't hidden policy. Argentina's intellectual elite wrote about it openly. Juan Bautista Alberti, one of the country's most influential political thinkers, declared that the path to civilization was to populate and to govern with European stock. The whitening of Argentina was not a side effect of immigration. It was the stated purpose. If this is shaking you, and it should be, join our WhatsApp channel. I go deeper on stories like this. The link is in the pinned comment. Tap it now. By 1875, the damage was done. The combination of segregation, epidemic disease, war casualties, mass imprisonment, and European immigration had reduced the visible black population to such a degree that the government simply stopped counting them. Afro-Argentines were removed from the national census entirely, not because they had all died, but because acknowledging their existence no longer served the national project. And then came the second phase of the erasure, the rewriting of the story. Once the black population had been reduced to a fraction of what it once was, Argentina's government and intellectual class set about erasing every trace of the African presence from the national narrative. The goal was not just to eliminate black people physically, it was to eliminate them from memory. The country stopped teaching its African history. The slave trade was minimized or denied entirely. The contributions of Afro-Argentines to the nation's culture, military, and economy were written out of textbooks. The mixed-race descendants of black Argentines were reclassified, not as black or mixed, but as a vague category called morocho, which could mean anyone with slightly darker skin, including Mediterranean immigrants. The racial category itself was dissolved. If you can't be counted, you can't be claimed. And if you can't be claimed, you never existed. A journalist captured the triumph of this project perfectly in 1905. Writing in the magazine Caras y Caretas, he said, "The race is losing its original color in the mixture. It turns gray. It dissolves. It becomes clear. An African tree is producing white flowers." He wrote that as a celebration, as evidence that the whitening of Argentina had succeeded. An African tree producing white flowers, the metaphor of a people being bred and blended out of existence, framed as progress. Even the tango was stolen. The music and dance form that emerged directly from Afro-Argentine communities, rooted in African rhythmic traditions, born in the black neighborhoods of Buenos Aires, was repackaged as a European art form. Today, when the world thinks of tango, it pictures elegant white couples in Buenos Aires ballrooms. The African origins were surgically removed from the narrative. The culture survived, the credit didn't. And perhaps the most devastating measure of the erasure's success is this: Many modern Argentines genuinely believe their country never participated in the slave trade. They believe there were never significant numbers of black people in Argentina. The amnesia is so complete that the victims have been erased not just from the census, but from the consciousness of an entire nation. Former President Carlos Menem's statement, "In Argentina, blacks do not exist. They wasn't ignorance." It was the final sentence of a project that began over 150 years earlier. The project worked, and the man who benefited from it could stand before the world and deny the existence of the people his predecessors destroyed. But they couldn't erase everything. Despite 150 years of genocide, demographic engineering, and cultural theft, Afro-Argentines still exist. A 2005 genetic study found that the average level of African genetic contribution in the population of Buenos Aires is over 2%, but that this component is concentrated in roughly 10% of the population who carry significantly higher levels of African ancestry. Over 5% of all Argentines say they have at least one black ancestor, and another 20% say they don't know whether they do or not. The blood survived, even when the identity was taken. In the neighborhoods of San Telmo and La Boca in Buenos Aires, the same. Areas where Afro-Argentine communities once thrived, there are still families who know their history. There are organizations like Africa Vive, founded by Afro-Argentine activist Pocha La Madrid, fighting to restore visibility to a community that was deliberately made invisible. There are academics at Argentine universities who are now, for the first time in over a century, studying the African roots of their own country. And there is a quiet recognition spreading slowly, painfully, that Argentina's claim to be a white European nation was always a lie. It was a project built on death, disease, war, erasure, and the deliberate destruction of a people who were there before any European immigrant set foot on Argentine soil. The black population of Argentina didn't disappear. They were disappeared by policy, by design, by a government that decided their existence was incompatible with the future it was building. And then that same government erased the evidence so thoroughly that the crime itself was forgotten. Until now. From 50% to less than 1%. From nearly half the population of Buenos Aires to a government that claims black people don't exist. From a vibrant community with its own newspapers, its own music, its own institutions. To a footnote erased from the census, the culture, and the national memory. This is what a successful genocide looks like. Not the kind with gas chambers and mass graves that the world can point to and say, never again. The quiet kind, the bureaucratic kind, the kind that uses disease instead of bullets, war instead of camps, immigration instead of deportation, and census manipulation instead of body counts. Domingo Faustino Sarmiento called black people a parasite on the tree of freedom. His government cut them down, and then they planted white flowers in the soil where black roots had been growing for 300 years. A journalist in 1905 celebrated it. A president in the 1990s denied it. And today, millions of Argentines have never heard of it. But the DNA doesn't lie. The archives don't lie. The neighborhoods of San Telmo and La Boca don't lie. And the African rhythms buried inside the tango, stripped of their credit but never of their soul, don't lie. Argentina erased its black population, but it couldn't erase the truth. Not completely, not forever, and not from this channel. Share this video with everyone. Send it to someone who thinks Argentina is a white country. Send it to someone who thinks genocide only looks like what happened in Europe. Because what happened in Argentina was just as deliberate, just as calculated, and just as devastating. It just had better PR. Subscribe. Hit the like. Drop a comment and tell me. Did you know Argentina was once nearly 50% black? Because now you do, and you can never unknow it. I'll see you in the next one.